Before she went in there, she was yelling at those 3 cops who were protecting the doors. She's saying, call for backup.
Call for
Do your
backup.
job,
That's right.
you know?
Yeah.
And then they just walk away and they leave the doors unprotected. And that's when this one guy grabs the helmet and starts breaking out the windows.
Yes.
And she jumps into that window after she punches him in the face.
Yes.
And knocks the glasses off. She's telling him to stop this, right?
Hard punch. Oh, yeah.
And yet now they call her an insurrectionist, and they denied her all military rights, when she died in her funeral, right? Her post-death treatment was as bad as her pre-death treatment almost in terms of emotionally for her mother and father. And then the next day, the people, the powers that be, to compensate for the fact that now the right has a martyr, they needed a martyr of their own. So they murdered a dead man. They took the dying Brian Sicknick, who dies that day.
You just said they murdered him?
Just utterly unrelated to January 6th, as the medical examiner's report would say. And they have him murdered.
Oh, my God. I couldn't think of a better guest to come on, talk about the topics that we're going to talk about. Somebody who, right before he came on, he's in the virtual green room. It's been a couple of years since he's been on. And I refer to it as, it's essentially, a fine wine that is aged to perfection. Jack Cashill, he's an independent writer, producer, and author of 50 nonfiction books. Most recently, the book titled Ashli, The Untold Story of the Women of January 6th. And most relevantly, TWA Flight 800, the crash, the cover-up, and the conspiracy, and so many other things to talk about. And I was discussing with him as I was bringing him on. When I say, Jack, a fine wine, everything that you've done, your entire body of work that you've dedicated, right, to, do you feel like it's this moment of time that you've prepared yourself for this glorious full disclosure and accountability that's coming?
Yeah, it's odd because I just started to write a new book, and I'm calling it A Grand Illusion, the left's 30-year war on the truth from 1994 to 2024.
Perfect.
And your remarks coming in, Pete, reminded me, I've written 2 books on airplane crashes. One is TWA Flight 800. Actually, I wrote 2 books about that crash. But another one was the crash of the Ron Brown aircraft in Croatia in 1996. Ron Brown was the Commerce Secretary under Bill Clinton. Just an incredibly corrupt character, but a guy with a good heart in many ways. And he was going to be a whistleblower before he was killed. But when I got the assignment to write the book on Ron Brown,
Jack, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Publishers, I said, listen, I can't. I don't know that this plane just didn't blow up. Stuff happens, airplanes crash. I don't want to write a book that insists that the plane crashed under dubious circumstances. I want to tell a fair story. So what I decided to do is tell the story of why the plane went up. And what I realized is that Ron Brown, who was not unique in this regard, he was a black Commerce Secretary, had been head of the DNC. But he did what so many other people in his position did, positions of power, and that is they were middlemen. They were the funnel through which millions, billions of dollars of government contracts were funneled to basically, white companies, but they needed a front man who represented that company and would get a partnership in that company. He learned his trade from Vernon Jordan, who was a classic DC insider. And so Ron Brown, when he became Commerce Secretary, had interest in probably a dozen different entities, things as different as, paper bag companies, radio stations, and also a major stake in the reconstruction of Haiti, which is where the real money was. And that's the kind of thing we're going to find out with USAID, that so much of that money is going to be found to go through middle people. And the middle people are the ones who are making the money.
I'm noticing a trend, and because you've investigated a lot of these things, I know that you can probably factualize my conspiracy theories, right? So I'm noticing around the world, let's say, for instance, the media uses their credentials as a member of the media as cover to go into war zones, and they send somebody with a British accent,
right.
But they're actually part of the intelligence services. They also use, of course, delivering government cheese with the sticker USAID gives them humanitarian cover, but what are they doing? Edward Snowden released this, and this is what I want to lead to. Did you ever find that this trend of using these humanitarian and non-suspecting, entities like media, that they use that as cover, just like Snowden revealed that he could go with diplomatic cover to these embassies to do what? To diddle with the servers and operate on behalf of the intel services to do spying at the embassies. Did you ever notice and factualize that?
Yeah, and it's what I have kind of a dual feeling about that. I have kind of a certain respect for Edward Snowden, and I was curious as to why they were zeroing in on Snowden at the Tulsi Gabbard hearings.
Did you say you don't have respect, or you do? I have respect for him.
I do.
Yes, I do too.
I do have respect for Snowden.
Yep.
I think he's a patriot, and yet technically he's a traitor. So it's
yes.
It needs to be kind of adjudicated in an open way.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I get doing intelligence work on our behalf.
Mm-hmm.
That makes some sense to me.
Sure.
But what I've discovered was that so much of the work that was being done was to line the pockets of these intermediaries.
Yes.
And also to subvert the cultures of the countries that they were allegedly saving, So does Peru really need trans comic books? I don't know that it does that country any good.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been doing this. The CIA has been a left-leaning organization since its inception. They were basically coming out of Ivy League, and they were of that mindset. The FBI, however, was not. It has historically been a conservative organization, and I think the FBI will be redeemed. I'm not so sure about the CIA.
Let's talk about the FBI, and I want to ask you, because I'm sure you've studied them it's decades now, right? You've been an author and covering stories. I not jokingly, it was a very serious matter. When these recent airplane crashes took place, anytime you hear that the FBI is coming in, I automatically say, oh, look out for the missing parts in the FBI
right.
storage locker, right? So tell everybody they don't know about TWA Flight 800 and what the FBI's involvement was in missing key critical evidence to show that it was shot out of the sky.
Right, and this is where the TWA 800 case is curious. And why the treatment of the crash in the Potomac was so much is refreshing in the way it's been handled so far. Because what happened with TWA 800? This is July 17th, 1996, commercial airplane crash, 230 people killed. By law, the responsibility for investigating that crash goes to the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB,
right?
Which is a nonpartisan. Historically pretty fair organization.
I agree.
It was not at that time because it was under control of the Clintons. But what they did, and this came out of basically out of the Justice Department, and the FBI had reports to the Deputy Attorney General, and that was Jamie Gorelick. Janet Reno was a figurehead. They just circumvented her. And what they did on day one is they sent the FBI in and had no authority to be there. And they replaced the NTSB. They pushed them aside.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a double problem because the FBI agents, even the good ones, had absolutely no experience in investigating plane crashes. They're out there talking to eyewitnesses with their little 302s, little notes they take, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have no any kind of instrumentation. They can't pinpoint where things are happening. No GPS, no nothing. They're just taking random interviews. So they're doing that, but behind the scenes, Pete, it's even worse. Because I know we got a hold of this treasure trove of CIA documents. We know that on day one also, the CIA was sent in. And the CIA was really pulling the strings of the FBI. So the FBI's original intent was to do a good job, but they were subverted, and then they yielded to that subversion. And the final result was the transformation of an obvious missile attack on an airplane into a mechanical failure.
And sir, was that evidence?
Story, and it's really the first time in, I'd say, recent memory that the deep state went into full, multifaceted operation where you had the NTSB, which finally caved, the CIA and the FBI working together to deceive the American people, and they could not have done it without the support of the New York Times.
Oh, another answer. I mean, the media. When I heard that the Pentagon removed all of they call them mainstream media. I see them as literally cover for the intelligence services, boring a hole.
Yes.
Operating as me. I've watched them do it on the ground at the in the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. I don't know if you remember that in Oregon. The Bundy protesters that took over.
Right.
Well, guess what CNN was doing for 9 hours? They're running around with their cameras. And they did 3-minute packages. I said, what are you doing with all that footage? Well, come to find out, I got wrapped up as a falsely indicted political prisoner. And I looked at the discovery. They were providing all of their video to the intel services to run facial recognition.
Right.
But
what I would say about the Potomac crash, for lack of a better name,
yes, sir,
is that what we did not see was the confiscation of all videos. We did not see, this happened with TW-800, right?
Mm-hmm.
We did not see the suppression of the radar data, the collection of all the towers' radar information and the suppression of that. We did not see the silencing of the eyewitnesses. We did not see the shutting out of the NTSB. So it was, I don't know that there are not some secrets being withheld, but compared to TW-800, it's day and night in terms of the way it was treated.
I don't know how much work you've done, but I'm going to tell you something that I've studied the Oklahoma City bombing. And right now we're waiting for 150 legal file boxes. The attorney who actually represented one of the Oklahoma City bombers, that contained in those boxes is all of the evidence of Merrick Garland single-handedly covering up the government's involvement. Now, did both of them deserve to be prosecuted? Absolutely. Was the government involved in that whole thing? It was all kept out of trial. And Merrick Garland was the one charged with that.
Yeah, and the field commander for Oklahoma City was, again, Jamie Gorelick, who is the mistress of disaster. There's an interesting parallel, though, if you think about this, Pete, is that I think it was the day after McVeigh was captured, which was probably 2 or 3 days after the bombing. And so there was an evidentiary hearing held in Oklahoma City at which the FBI chief investigator testified. And he testified to the multiple eyewitnesses who saw McVeigh with the short, dark, swarthy guy,
right,
who got the title John Doe number 2.
Right.
And, there were something 30-some eyewitnesses.
Yes.
It was like they were trying to be identified. And this was about 3 days afterwards. FBI, Washington Post reports, it's no secret, national manhunt for John Doe number 2, right? Does that recall any other national manhunts for missing bombers, right? I've been calling the pipe bomber on January 6th John Doe number 3, right?
Yeah.
Same thing.
And by the way, that's a great
manhunt, multiple hundreds of $1,000s reward, and then it just is allowed to go away. And the reason is, I'm convinced, is that they realized that the John Does that they're looking for were allies. They were part of the plot. And on January 6th, for instance, the curious character there is Kamala Harris, right? She's sort of the fly in that ointment. Yeah. She shows up at the DNC when the bomb was discovered at the DNC. I don't think the people running that plot knew that Kamala Harris was going to be there with her Secret Service detail. So it added an element of confusion and complexity that they weren't prepared for. So the way they dealt with it was to silence her. She never spoke about being there at the DNC when the bomb was found. And she had plenty of opportunity to do so. So when, for instance, Trump was nearly assassinated, she might have said, hey, I was nearly assassinated. I was within 20 feet of a pipe bomb. Never mentioned it. From day one, she was silent about it. And as a result of her silence, for a year, the J6 defendants who were being prosecuted the first year had an added charge, and that is that they infringed her protectee space at the Capitol during the riot. She wasn't at the Capitol during the riot. She never was. She went from the DNC, and she was taken from DNC to some secure location. So the whole thing is smells. There are parallels in history, but I think what we're going to see with this crash over the Potomac is a refreshing break from that history. I'm hoping that for the next 4 years we'll be able to trust our intelligence agencies.
My goodness, at a very young age, I just want to tell you, I actually came out of the military. I had a lot of technical background. I went to work, long story short, I went to work for a laser manufacturer, right? I had a lot of technical experience because I did aviation weapons on, fixed wing and rotary. So I went to work for the laser manufacturer, and then they had a special product, and I was a military guy, so I got along with law enforcement. It was a product for law enforcement. It was a portable laser fingerprint identification system. And I sold 10 units. I mean, it was a big deal. They were like $8,000 a piece to the Federal Bureau of Investigation crime lab in Quantico, Virginia. And I remember how high of a regard I had for the top law enforcement. The premier law enforcement agency was always that way, and it really, really was. They would spare no expense to use the technology that they needed to go get the perpetrators of crimes that we want to go get. And never talking about the level of corruption that we do today. There's just, have you ever read the Communist Manifesto? It's part of their plan.
I can't say that I've read it cover to cover, but I've read through it.
Number 35, right? It's part of what they read into the congressional record back in 1963, I think it was. Their goal was to discredit the FBI.
Yeah. I mean, I have done a lot of research on J. Edgar Hoover, who is, I think history is maltreated, personally. He obviously had his flaws, and he was in power too long. But he created the world's best, police agency ever. And my father's a police officer, so I've always, tended to support the boys in blue. In fact, including people like Derek Chauvin, et cetera. But the FBI, as they are currently constituted now, have been mismanaged since the Clinton era.
Oh, yes.
And they've been corrupted at the top, and we saw that dramatically, of course, with Crossfire Hurricane and all this anti-Trump plotting. But I still think the rank and file is salvageable. I'm not so sure about the CIA.
No, I agree with that. Sir, let's transition to the next topic. Now, I'm going to load, and you'll be able to take off from there. This is what I've learned on the outside, and because of my experience with the Bundy Ranch cases, I became an expert on going through every frame of video, to turning the volume down. I don't want to listen to anybody telling me what I'm seeing. So I reviewed every frame of the beautiful soul that's on the front cover of your book, Ashli, The Untold Story of the Women of January 6th. Now, I found out she was a former Air Force military police officer. Secondly, I watched her frame by frame clock the guy that was using a helmet to break the window. And then I turned the volume up and I rewound it, and she's just yelling at him not to do that. She's literally, as a military police officer, it's in her DNA. She's going to try to control the situation, right? I watched that. I knew her background, okay? We watched what happened. She went up through the window. Who knows what was what her state of mind was? Maybe to go get some help, right? She didn't know she was going to get ambushed that way. But here's the next thing. Isn't it curious how the left, they never, because they're always claiming the exclusive rights to fight for the plight of the oppressed woman and the, and the abused woman and the so on and so forth. Isn't it curious how they never speak of the women of January 6th? Isn't that curious to you?
No, because they, for them, the women of January 6th were like that 53% of American women who voted for Donald Trump.
Patriots.
Became deplorables. They were not worth defending. They don't even mention the other woman who was killed that day, Roseanne Boylan.
Oh, my goodness, sir. Yeah.
I mean, Roseanne's name doesn't even show up on the 800-page J6 House Committee report. Ashli Babbitt is mentioned only in passing. Michael Byrd, the man who shot and killed Ashli Babbitt, is not mentioned in that report. There was no investigation, police investigation into Roseanne's Boylan's, essentially with her murder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Her case is even more gruesome than Ashli Babbitt's, and she was, she'd been suffocated under a pile that police pushed on top of her and gassed before that. And while she's lying there unconscious, a policewoman comes by with a tree branch that she had picked up and starts bashing her over the head with it while she's unconscious and maybe dying. And she dies, right? This is all captured on video.
Oh, yeah.
The policewoman gets sent to the Super Bowl as a hero a month later. No action at all against her.
Mm-hmm.
No action at all against Michael Byrd, the man who shot and killed Ashli Babbitt. And you're right, Pete. There's a guy, his name's Zachary Lamb. He's breaking out the windows of this doorway. And the police have abandoned their post. There are 3 cops standing in front of it. They just walk away. Ashli's yelling at him, "Do your job. Call for backup," And you're right, her DNA kicks in. She, in fact, spent 14 years military police work. In fact, she was a part of the Capitol National Guard unit that was later called in at some point. Mm-hmm. And that's a scandal in itself. But and then I think she jumps into that window frame to escape the mayhem behind her. And someone's yelling, "There's a gun." She doesn't know where that gun is. And then, without warning, without identifying himself, he's in plain clothes, he's masked.
Was she not calling for backup?
Shoots and kills him.
Was she not screaming through the window saying, "You better get back up here. You need to get back up"? Yeah. Was she not saying that?
No, I don't know what she's saying in that window frame, but before she went in there, she was yelling at those 3 cops who were protecting the doors. Mm-hmm. She's saying, call for backup.
Call for backup. Your job, that's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then they just walk away and they leave the doors unprotected. Mm-mm-mm. And that's when this one guy grabs the helmet and starts breaking out the windows.
Yes.
And she jumps into that window after she punches him in the face.
Yes.
And knocks the glasses off. She's telling him to stop this, right?
Hard punch. Oh, yeah.
And yet now they call her an insurrectionist, and they denied her all military rights, when she died in her funeral, right?
Mm-hmm.
Her post-death treatment was as bad as her pre-death treatment almost in terms of emotionally for her mother and father.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day, the powers that be, to compensate for the fact that now the right has a martyr, they needed a martyr of their own. So they murdered a dead man. They took the dying Brian Sicknick, who dies that day.
You just said they murdered him?
Just utterly unrelated to January 6th, as the medical examiner's report would say. And they have him murdered.
Oh, my God. Jack, there's... where I left off it was stunning to me what you said, because I remember hearing the fire extinguisher story and then that unraveled, but I've never heard about what happened thereafter, and you refer to it as murder.
Right. I mean, I put that in quotes in a sense because Sicknick was already dead. I mean, he died of a series of blood clots at the base of his brain. It had nothing, totally organic, a natural death. This is all in his medical examiner's report. However, they did the medical examiner's report on the 8th of January. On the 7th of January, after Sicknick dies, the 2 law enforcement officials, that is according to New York Times, tell the New York Times that a pro-Trump mob hit Sicknick over the head with a fire extinguisher. And they add this ghastly detail. So this is not just a miscommunication. And they say he was rushed out of the Capitol with blood rushing from a huge gash in his head.
Oh, wow.
And died, subsequently.
Uh-huh.
So, and then they suppressed the autopsy report for 100 days. The media didn't know. Yes. So for 100 days, they reported that whole hog. Glenn Greenwald, the independent writer, was commenting on it. He said it's the most significant fact about the day, because what happened is that on January 6th and 7th, people were still defending the protest. As soon as they heard about the murder of Brian Sicknick, everyone fell silent on our side, right?
Yes.
But then another thing was going on. I was watching the hearings the other day for Kash Patel, and several senators, including Blumenthal and Hirono and Schiff, I don't know how he got to be a senator, but they kept talking about how Kash Patel had called these people political prisoners, the prison choir. And they all cited Julian Cater, a guy named, who was a curious case because they basically tried Cater for the murder of Brian Sicknick, knowing that Sicknick had not been killed by a fire extinguisher. Mm-hmm. So the general public would not learn until April that, and the media would not learn until April that he had died of natural causes. Mm-hmm. But in March, they arrest Julian Cater because they need to keep this story going.
The murder.
They need to sustain the martyrdom of Brian Sicknick, but they know the fire extinguisher story is false. So the Justice Department arrests Cater and charges him with pepper spraying Sicknick. And hundreds of people were pepper sprayed that day.
Yes.
And the medical examiner said Sicknick showed no allergy to chemical irritants. That had nothing to do with his death. But instead, so they can't charge him with murder or manslaughter, but they could keep the public narrative alive.
That's right.
That Sicknick was murdered by the use of this chemical irritant. So Cater has to plead, otherwise he's looking at life imprisonment. He pleads to an 80-month sentence, right? And then you get guys like Schiff and Rosenthal saying, Blumenthal rather. Is it Rosenthal? Blumenthal.
Blumenthal, that's right, yeah.
Right, from Connecticut, Denang Dick, saying that's proof that these guys were killers. They admitted their guilt, right?
Yes, that's right.
Well, when you're being tried in a city, 95% of whose residents voted against Donald Trump, and no Jay Sixer, who went before a jury, was acquitted. None. Mm-hmm. None was allowed a change of venue. Mm-hmm. These are all show trials. And just as in the Moscow show trials, they didn't want convictions. They wanted people to plea out.
That's right.
So that they could publicly admit their guilt.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And then they would use that public admission as proof that these people were traitors. And that's exactly what they did to Cater and a bunch of other guys.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, and now, I'm sorry. Sometimes I'm dumb as a box of paper clips, but you're right. They created the false narrative and held it, knowing full well that he wasn't murdered, but they needed that murder, right? Because I'll tell you what, I was there. I watched something I was outraged by, okay? And at first, I saw tear gas. Listen, I was standing in a crowd. It's pretty overwhelming and beautiful. Right. It's the most patriotic event. Flags are waving. People are praying. The people that were wearing the camp, they were all kitted up, and they were worried about protecting the protesters from possible Antifa. I felt comfortable with those that were wearing, the Kevlar helmets, and they were there to protect us. That's the way we respected those people, keeping us safe. We were self-policing. But when I watched some people get out of hand, next thing you know, I see the tear gas, at a distance coming down from the Washington Monument. But when I got up there, guess what I saw? This is literally, I grabbed my bullhorn, and I'm on video, and I had to hide it because I didn't want to be indicted again. I went into a restricted area for a couple seconds, and I used my bullhorn. I said, there's women here. There's women and children. They're firing concussion grenades into the crowd. And I said to myself, this is what you don't do if you want to keep a crowd peaceful, is fire at the women in the crowd. And
exactly.
Right? These are patriotic.
And they did that promiscuously, and they did it without provocation. And they fired into the middle of the crowd. They fired at head height. All of this stuff is just amateurish and reckless. But in Cater's case, he was responding to getting sprayed. A cop just wanders in with his chemical earth and sprays it right at everyone's faces. Sicknick was one of 3 people who were sprayed by Cater. He was 5 to 8 feet away. He wasn't the first one to get it. He washed his face off. Was 20 minutes later, was back on the line of duty, just like everyone else.
Yeah.
Hundreds of people got sprayed that day.
Yes, that's right.
In fact, most of the damage done at the Capitol was from having to clean up the spray that the police used that sort of wafted back into the building.
Yeah, Jack.
And you're right. The people brought pepper spray, because the previous Trump rallies in November and December, they'd been attacked by Antifa.
Oh, yeah. And this is a point. I'm going to read this, okay? Everybody, I want you to know this because, just like the comment before we went to the break, and he said the murder of Sicknick, right? Point made. Yeah. They held that for 100 days falsely. Also, Ashli, the untold story of the women of January 6th. And I'm going to read this. You ready? This is why I want to encourage everybody to support this, because one of the most patriotic women that I know in my life, I'm going to tell you who she is. The women of January 6th did not come as women. They came as Americans, as patriots, as defenders of the Republic, knowing full well that because of the opposition, there was danger that Antifa would throw a firework into the crowd. There were 1 million people there. My wife was with me. There were other women. My attorney's wife, who was pregnant, was with me. And they all came as patriots, knowing that there was that danger that just by being present, they would be attacked by our political opponents. And despite that, they stood up as patriots and went anyway.
And, there's another angle to that, too, that I found out. And although, the men, by and large, were sentenced more severely than the women, the women were treated more violently in the protest. And one woman, you probably know her, Pete, Victoria White.
Oh, my goodness.
She endured the most brutal beating ever captured on video.
Oh, yes.
Of a woman by police.
Yes.
And she was hit in the head at least 30 times. Her face was bleeding, blood streaming down. It's captured on video for anyone who wants to see it. And I asked Victoria, I said, why did they go after the women the way they did?
Why?
And she said, and I think her answer was right, that they wanted to provoke the men.
Oh, right? My goodness, yes.
So the guy who came to her defense, the Victoria White's defense, ends up getting 7 years in prison, right? The guys who tried to protect Roseanne Boylan when they're from getting beaten, they all got, lengthy prison sentences as well.
Yes.
If that was part of the strategy, it was pretty effective.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we got back, we had an Airbnb, just outside of the D.C. area. And as soon as I turned the local news on, right, because we got out of the Capitol when it was done, the sun started coming down, and I'm like, oh, this is stupid. So we got out. I didn't know what they were going to do. We went back, and I turned on the television. You know who I see? Is Jake Lang. And he's taking a baseball bat to a shield. Now, I said, whoa. That's not what we're about. That's not cool. We backed the blue. Yeah. That's not right. A couple people got out of hand. But guess what I found out not too long afterwards is that at his feet in that general area, they were performing CPR on Roseanne Boylan. Right. And I'm going to tell you something.
And he helped try to revive her.
Yes.
And that story is totally buried. And I tell her story in the book as well. In the book, Ashli, of the 10 women I profile, and I picked them kind of at random. And fortunately, I had a female private investigator friend helping me on this project, first to identify, how I could locate these women, and then to make the initial contact to ease their, concerns.
Sure.
All 8 of the surviving women cooperated with me, as did Ashli Babbitt's mother, Mickey Whithoff. But of those 8 women, all 8 of them were incarcerated, right? The only one that committed something that resembled a crime was Rachel Powell, who helped break a window, was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison for that. Now, I singled out this case just the other day, just going through it, of what happened to the George Floyd protesters in that summer of 2020. And, they attacked the White House the opening night, injured 70 Secret Service officers. And then they proceeded to have 3 weeks of on and off violence and vandalism, billions of dollars of damage. And one guy, an Antifa ringleader, during that period, named Jason Charter, he was first arrested for attacking a crowd of a walk-away crowd, Brandon Straka's group.
Yeah.
He was arrested for, just attacking one of them. Then he was arrested for attacking a police officer, right? And he's still out on bail or whatever, or just out wandering around. Then he is the lead ringleader in this statue, the toppling of a statue of, and I forget the guy's name. You probably know who he is in Washington. But then he gets arrested again for leading the attempt to topple the statue of Andrew Jackson in front of the White House. They had ropes and acid and all kinds of stuff. This is a serious effort.
Oh yeah.
So he has several of these charges against him. They fold them all into one misdemeanor, right? And then they let him plead guilty to 3 months of probation.
Wow.
And then he complains. He said it was appalling because the other people weren't getting that. The other people weren't being charged as severely as he was. The other people meaning his other people.
Yes.
Right? For Eddie and Jay Sixer, who did any of that, he'd have been 8 years easy, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
My the one great grandmother I profiled, Rebecca Lorenz, great character. She gets 6 months for home incarceration for walking into the Capitol for 10 minutes through an open door and praying, right? A great grandmother.
Yeah.
Hers was the least of the. She was the one who didn't go to prison. She was home incarcerated. The other 7 all went to prison. And the prison conditions were horrific in many cases. Christine Priola, the sweet lady, I've since met some of these people, and they were in prison when I started the project. She's an occupational therapist, Cleveland School District. She walks into the Senate chamber, open door, has a sign, "Please protect the children," blah, blah, blah. The people in the Cleveland School District competed with each other to rat her out, to call the FBI and identify her. They arrested her, a big shock and awe raid at her home. She's divorced, living by herself. On January 8th, the morning of, that's how quickly they were working. She gets sent to prison. She gets put in the, this shoe, the holes, special housing unit, with a man, right? They put a guy pretending to be a woman in her cell with her. One tiny, special housing unit cell, one toilet, right? No barriers with a guy, right? This is the kind of treatment these people were getting. They were being treated like they were had blown up the World Trade Center. Except those people had the ACLU on their side and other groups trying to, come to their aid. Yeah. The ACLU, in this case, the Washington ACLU, put out a report that could have been written by the ACLU of Rome the day after the Visigoths sacked the city. That's how hysterical it was.
Wow.
And they wanted these people in prison for the rest of their lives. I mean, they showed no mercy. Not only no mercy, but no hint of the inequity, the disparity in the treatment between what happened to these people and what happened to for instance, the people in January 20th, 2017, the Disrupt J20 movement. This is pure Antifa black bloc stuff. They rampaged through the streets of Washington, set police cars on fire, vandalized other cars, terrorized patrons, passengers, broke huge shop windows, set fires. Not a single one of them went to prison. Not a single one. 6 went to trial, and they were all acquitted on all charges by a D.C. jury that was 95% Democratic. And then the DOJ just dropped the charges against hundreds of others. This is why these people are all political prisoners.
Yes.
It was the most lopsided injustice since the Jim Crow South. I mean, it's and at least in the Jim Crow South, the Scottsboro boys at least had a national media that was on their side and a Supreme Court that intervened. There was no such intervention for these people until Donald Trump became president.
I mean, the overcharging and the jailing of dissenters, in the fashion that they did. Historically, you see that. I mean, this is like Maoism. This is, Stalin. This is what they did in these other regimes that we've always protected our country from,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Right. And I just reading a book on the show trials in post-World War II in the Soviet bloc countries.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And they were done, and there were a lot of them, and they were done to humiliate and to debase movements, not just individuals.
Right.
They just wanted to tell a whole swath of the population
Don't you dare.
that the people you are looking up to are traitors. They're pleading guilty, you see. Why did they plead guilty? Well, they had no choice. I mean, if they could plead innocent, they probably just get executed on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
So they get 20-year prison sentences. Many of them were executed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had our own series of show trials. And, when I watched the Kash Patel hearings, and he was kind of hamstrung. He couldn't say what I'm sure what he'd like to have said. But
Sure.
The Democrats still are allowed, I should say, to play as ignorant as they choose to be.
Yes, sir. I have a couple things here as we wind down. Did you cover in your book, and I'm sorry that I don't know this. Oh, by the way, I ordered the ebook, right? Because I want to get right to it. I want to help you promote this, and also a hardcover copy. All right, I want to help support your work. Thank you for covering this in the fashion that you did, especially because of what I said. The women that were with me. If I had intended to insurrect, I wouldn't have brought those women.
Right.
Left them home, and I would have brought a bunch of friends with lots of guns. That's an insurrection, right?
No, right, exactly. Because people, everyone I wasn't there, but you were there, Pete. Everyone I talked to said, we were having the time of our lives. It was great. The rally was fun. Everyone, people were with people like themselves. They weren't wearing masks. They weren't, acting like they were, residents of some national insane asylum like the left had us pretend to do for the previous 9 months. And then, they get to the Capitol and things go crazy.
You know what the spirit
what they didn't do either, the women, is they didn't bring like their own laundry list of special needs, No. Like reproductive rights or blah, 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 or, and these women had all the rights to reproduce they wanted. Rachel Powell, who got sent to prison for 4 years for breaking window, has 8 children, right?
Mm-hmm.
Several of these women have, multiple children, 4, 8, 4, 6 women. And they went because they wanted their daughters and their sons to grow up in a country that resembled the one they grew up in.
Yeah. It was the most patriotic event that I had ever been present for, A. B, you know what the general sentiment was? I can't speak for everybody there. There was too many. But guess what? We needed that for what? We expected when we went down to the Capitol to be this microphone right out there, out on the front porch. And somebody would come out and say, the people have spoken. We're going to investigate. That's all we were looking for. Nobody wanted to stop the proceeding. We wanted the proceeding to go on and to come out and say.
Because you'd have 9 or 10 hours of at least the dirty laundry being exposed in the halls of Congress. And there was very little chance that it was going to be that Mike Pence would send it back to the states for a 10-day audit, what they were asking for. But at least there would be that exposure.
That's exactly right.
Of why people were concerned about the outcome of that election.
And you amass that many people, you're going to be like, oh, my goodness, I'm going to have to go out there to the microphone and tell these people, regardless of what you say, we're going forward with the stolen election that you suspect happened. You know what I mean? They're going to be less likely to do that. And that's why they ran this operation. Did you interview, I have one other question. Did you interview Simone Gold, Dr. Simone Gold?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I'm working, had been working on and off on her memoirs. She's great.
Can you imagine
Simone
her?
Gold is just classic case. And
oh, my goodness.
It's also a classic case of what happens when you decide to go to trial. Because she's there with her beau/bodyguard, John Strand.
Right.
She has a permit to speak on medical freedom. She's not even talking about the election.
Right.
And she gets swept into the Capitol through an open door. She gives her speech in the rotunda, and John is there with her. They're there 20 minutes. They walk out, as soon as they could find their way out. That was kind of complicated. And then they're back in Los Angeles a couple of weeks later. Bam, bam, bam. Battering ram through the front door.
Of course. 20
FBI agents. They arrest them both, right?
Yeah.
And Simone, she's a daughter of a Holocaust survivor. I mean, she's a doctor and a lawyer. She started America's Frontline Doctors.
Right.
Just a really brilliant woman. She has to take a plea deal because she has this organization she started. She can't go to prison. She'd abandoned all the people depending on her.
Right.
But John Strand is a real kind of stand-up Christian guy, and he says he's not going to testify falsely against himself.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes to trial. And they give him 4 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he and Simone put together a video that shows just how corrupt that trial was, how they manipulated the evidence, falsified the evidence to convince the jury that he was militating against the police, right? So, for instance, they have a video. There's a video, and they have it now. John is cheering on these police officers who are going in to help quell the protest. And at one point, his hand is up in the air like this, right?
Yeah.
And they said, and they do a still frame.
Yes.
Because they don't have access to the video yet.
Right.
They said he was railing against the police officers, demanding blah, 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 blah. You know?
Yeah.
And he was just released also. And he's very outspoken, very eloquent guy, and he could make a difference.
You know, do you intend, it's not my last question, I got one more for you, but do you intend to continue to cover the story? Because I believe that federal agents, especially with the new administration, are going to want to come forward and say, what I saw behind the scenes, I was compartmentalized, but I connected dots later, and I want to come forward and just say things were done really, really wrong. There's a lot of stuff that you don't know. Do you think that that information is going to come out, and are you going to continue to cover it?
I hope so, because what I can do right now, Pete, and there are people who are there who know bits and pieces of this story well, but what I try to do is step back and do the comprehensive view of what happened and why it happened. So in the book Ashli, I traced the movement, the whole movement of these women to Washington, why they went, how they got there, what they dressed like, what they were doing, what they were thinking, what inspired them in the first place to protest. And then consequently, what happens to them once they get there, and what are the consequences in their lives afterwards.
Jack, I'm going to we have just a couple seconds here.
I like to do it.
Yeah. Also, I already told you, I'm going to get in touch with you. Something major is going to hit here to the federal court docket, especially with Pam Bondi in place. I'm going to get that to you because you're going to be able to connect a lot of dots in your work. You're going to be kind of shocked at some of the stuff that's been going on over many decades. But, sir, Cashill.com, where everybody can go. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I hate to cut you off, but we're going to come off our networks. Thank you for joining me, and I'm going to get in touch with you today.
Okay, take care.
All right, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, right now what I want you to do is go to WKRPete.com. You're going to do one of two things. Click that Angel Investor button, or if you can't do Angel Investor, I want you to click that Project Colossus. Every single person hearing my voice is going to step up. Major news coming here. We're on Wednesday between now and Friday. And I mean big news coming. So get her done. Let's go. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you on LFA TV this afternoon. Share this episode. Take action. Go to WKRP.com.